Ethan slammed the truck into reverse and floored it. Tires screamed. Gravel exploded behind him. Every car on that mountain road was fighting to get out, and he was the only one driving in. The fire was 50 yards away and closing. He could feel the heat through the windshield before he even stopped. He jumped out, ran straight toward the wall of flames. No gear, no radio, no backup. Just a mechanic from a town nobody's heard of running into something that professional firefighters were running away from. He found her trapped inside a burning SUV, screaming for help that wasn't coming. 16 cars had already passed her. Ethan was number 17, and stopped. What she said to him afterward, 4 quiet words, whispered in a smoke-filled truck, didn't just change her life. It broke something open inside him that he'd kept locked shut for 4 years. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. If this hits you, subscribe and stay with me, because what happens next, nobody saw coming. The thing about Ethan Walker was that he never looked like a hero. He looked like a man who was tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from a bad night's sleep. The deep kind. The kind that settles into your shoulders and stays there for years. The kind that shows up in the way a man moves through a grocery store slowly, deliberately, checking prices twice before putting anything in the cart. He was 35 years old, but some mornings he felt 60. He lived in Ridgemont, Oregon, a mountain town small enough that everybody knew your truck, but not always your name. He ran a one-man mechanic shop out of a converted barn on the edge of town. The sign out front said Walker Auto and Repair, in letters that had faded from red to pink over the years, and he kept telling himself he'd repaint it when things slowed down. They never slowed down. Not because business was booming, it wasn't, but because Ethan Walker could not say no to a person in need. That was his problem. Always had been. His daughter, Mia, knew it better than anyone. She was 10 years old, sharp as a tack, with her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. And she had developed the habit of standing in the doorway of the shop with her arms crossed whenever she felt her father was being taken advantage of. "Dad," she said one evening, watching him replace a tire for old Mr. Hutchins, who everyone in town knew hadn't paid for a service in 3 years. "You know he's not going to pay you again, right?" Ethan didn't look up. "Hand me that wrench, would you?" "Dad, Mia." She picked up the wrench, slapped it into his palm a little harder than necessary. "I'm just saying, I know what you're saying. He's got a brand new flat screen in his living room. I saw it through the window last week." Ethan paused, looked up at Mr. Hutchins, who was sitting on an overturned bucket, pretending not to hear, and then looked back at his daughter. "People make choices. Mia, we can only control ours." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she walked back inside the house and let the screen door slap shut behind her. Mr. Hutchins cleared his throat. "She's a good kid. Best thing I ever did," Ethan said, and went back to work. That was Ethan in a nutshell. He gave more than he had. He asked for less than he needed. And every night, after Mia was asleep, he'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, gone cold, and stare up at the mountains and think about a version of his life that had once seemed possible and didn't anymore. His wife, Claire, had been gone for 4 years. A car accident. Black ice. A February night that started like any other and ended in a way Ethan still couldn't fully articulate. Even to himself. He didn't talk about it. Not with his neighbors. Not with the guys at the hardware store who asked how he was holding up. Not even with Mia, though he suspected she understood more than he gave her credit for. What he did instead was work. He worked until his hands hurt. He fixed engines and transmissions and brake systems for people who sometimes paid him and sometimes didn't. He taught Mia how to change a tire and how to check her oil and how to look a person in the eye when they were talking to you. Because those were things she would need. He coached her soccer team on weekends. He sat in the back row at her school plays, the ones where she had 3 lines and forgot 2 of them. And he clapped the loudest anyway. And he never, not once, told anyone that for 7 years before he moved to Ridgemont, he had been a volunteer wildfire responder. Not a firefighter. Exactly. Something closer to a first responder. He'd been trained in emergency extraction, structural assessment, evacuation coordination. He'd gone into burning buildings when the professionals needed help holding the line. He'd carried people out of places that should have been impossible to survive. He'd stopped doing it when Claire died. Couldn't leave Mia. Couldn't justify the risk anymore. But the training never left him. It lived in his body in the way he automatically clocked exits when he walked into a room, in the way he'd stop and read the wind on a hot day, in the way he noticed things most people walked right past. He noticed things. That was important. Remember that. The afternoon it happened was a Thursday in late July. Ethan had driven 40 minutes up the mountain to drop off a rebuilt alternator for a logging company that operated 2 valleys over. It was routine, a job he'd done a dozen times. He was behind the wheel of his old F-250, windows down, country music low on the radio, thinking about nothing in particular, whether Mia needed new cleats, whether he should finally repaint the shop sign, whether he had enough hamburger for dinner. Normal thoughts, small thoughts. The kind of thoughts a man thinks when he believes the day is almost over. He was about 15 miles from home, coming around a switchback that looked out over the valley, when he saw the color of the sky change. Not slowly, not the way you watch a sunset shift. It changed the way a light goes out sudden and complete. The western horizon, which had been pale blue 30 seconds ago, was now the color of a bruise, orange at the edges, gray-black in the center. And the smell hit him through the open window like a fist. Smoke. The thick kind. The kind that carries embers. Ethan killed the radio. He leaned forward over the steering wheel and stared at the ridge above him. That fire's not supposed to be there, he thought. And then that fire wasn't there this morning. He knew about the Clearwater fire. Everyone in the county knew about it. It had been burning 15 miles north for 2 weeks. Contained at 60%, downgraded on Tuesday. The news reports said it was under control. The news reports were wrong. A wind shift. That's what nobody had planned for. The kind of rapid directional change that doesn't show up in forecasts, that experienced firefighters dread, that turns a manageable burn into something else entirely in under an hour. Ethan didn't know any of that yet. He just knew what his eyes were telling him. The ridge was on fire, and the road between him and home ran directly underneath it. He pulled the truck over and stepped out, stood in the road, and watched the smoke column boil upward, estimated the rate of spread by the way it was moving against the sky, looked at the wind direction, looked at the topography. His old instincts came back so fast it felt like they'd never left. The fire will come down that slope. It'll hit the canyon floor. The wind is pushing it southeast. If it reaches the canyon, he was already back in the truck. He grabbed his phone, called 911, told them what he was seeing, where he was, what direction the fire was moving, all of it in less than 60 seconds, the way a man talks when he's been trained to communicate under pressure. The dispatcher said units were responding to a fire event in the area. "How many civilians are on Route 12 right now?" Ethan asked. "Sir, we're asking everyone to evacuate." "How many people are still on that road?" A pause. "We don't have that information. Please evacuate immediately." Ethan hung up. He sat there for 3 seconds, staring through the windshield. Then he made a decision that he would later struggle to explain to anyone who wasn't standing in that moment, because, from the outside, it looked insane. He turned the truck around and drove back toward the fire. Route 12 was chaos. He came around the bend and drove straight into a scene that looked like the opening of a disaster movie, except the cameras weren't rolling and nobody was getting paid. Cars were stopped at all angles. Some had been abandoned mid-lane, doors hanging open, like the drivers had simply stood up and started running. Families were moving on foot along the shoulder. Mothers pulling children by the wrist, fathers carrying toddlers. Nobody looking back. The smoke was lower now, dense, moving fast. Ethan drove against traffic with his headlights on and his hand on the horn. Not because he thought it would help, but because it was all he had. He was scanning. That's what his training called it, scanning. Your eyes never stop moving. You're looking for the thing that's wrong, the thing that doesn't fit. The thing that everyone else has already moved past because they were too scared to stop. He found it in under 2 minutes. A silver SUV, expensive. The kind you see in corporate parking lots, sitting at an angle in the gravel pullout just past the third guardrail. Engine still running. Hazard lights on. And flames were moving along the tree line 30 feet away and closing fast. He stopped. He could see a figure inside the vehicle. Moving. Trying the door. He was out of his truck before it fully stopped rolling. "Hey!" He ran toward the SUV. Waving. "Hey, can you get out?" The window came down 2 inches. A woman's voice. Controlled but strained in the way a person sounds when they are terrified and trying very hard not to sound terrified. "The door is jammed. I went off the gravel and hit the guardrail. I can't get it open from inside. Can you climb to the other side?" I tried. "The passenger door won't open either. The frame is bent." "I don't." A pause. He heard her take one deliberate breath. "I don't think I can get out on my own." Ethan was already at the driver's door. His hand on the handle, feeling the resistance. She was right. The frame had warped on impact, subtle. The kind of damage you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. But enough to seal both doors tight. He stepped back and looked at the vehicle. Looked at the fire line. Looked at the gap. Maybe 4 minutes. Maybe less. "What's your name?" he said. A beat. "Olivia." "Olivia. My name is Ethan. I'm going to get you out of there. But I need you to stay very calm and do exactly what I say." "Can you do that?" Another beat. "Longer, this time?" "Yes." He pulled out his keys. On the ring, a multi-tool he'd carried for 12 years. The one Claire had given him the Christmas before she died. The one he'd never once left the house without. He extended the glass-breaking spike. "Turn your face away from the window," he said. She turned. He hit the rear passenger window hard and fast. 2 strikes, and it shattered inward. "Olivia, listen to me. There's a gap in the fire line to the right. I need you to go out through this window, and you need to go now. Don't stop. Don't look at the fire. You look at me and you move toward me. Do you understand?" "I understand." "The smoke is going to get thicker. Pull your shirt up over your mouth. Keep low. Go." She came through the window the way a person does who has never done anything remotely like this in their life, awkward, terrified, but moving. That was the important thing. She was moving. He grabbed her arm the moment she cleared the window frame. And he ran. She ran with him. Stumbling once, catching herself. And he didn't slow down. Didn't let go of her arm, just pulled and kept moving, until the heat behind them became sound, a deep, rolling crack like the earth itself was splitting, and he knew without looking that the SUV was fully involved. They reached his truck. He got her door open. Got her inside. Got around to his side. And he was pulling out of the gravel even before his door was fully closed. He drove for about a mile before either of them said anything. The road ahead was clearer. The smoke was thinning. Through the rearview mirror, Ethan could see the fire line advancing across the ridge fast. Hungry, indifferent. He had both hands on the wheel. His knuckles were pale. He was breathing. Olivia was sitting in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap. Very still, looking straight ahead. She was somewhere in her mid-40s. Dark hair pulled back. Now partially loose from the chaos of the last 5 minutes. A blazer that probably cost more than Ethan's monthly shop revenue. Torn at the shoulder where she'd scraped through the window frame. A thin cut on her forehead. Not serious, but bleeding enough to stripe the side of her face. She looked like she had just survived something. Because she had. "You need to see a medic," Ethan said. "There should be emergency services set up at the staging area on Route 9. About 8 miles. She said nothing. "Olivia." She turned and looked at him. Her eyes were. He didn't quite have a word for it. Not grateful exactly. Not shocked exactly. Something more complicated than both. "Why did you come back?" she said. It wasn't an emotional question. It was almost clinical. Like she genuinely couldn't compute the answer and needed the data. Ethan shrugged one shoulder. Because someone needed help. She stared at him for a long moment. "That's it?" she said. "That's it." She turned back toward the windshield. Looked at the mountains. looked at the smoke rising behind them like a column of ash trying to reach the sky. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. "No, Olivia Bennett." He glanced at her. The name didn't register. Not immediately, and she saw that on his face. "I run Bennett Technologies." Ethan nodded slowly. "Okay, I know what it is," he said. "I just don't pay much attention to that world." She looked at him again. Like he was a puzzle she'd never seen the shape of before. "Most people would have led with that," she said. "If they'd just saved me. I'm not most people." They drove in silence for a moment. "Well," she said finally. "Thank you, Ethan." "You're welcome, Olivia." He kept both hands on the wheel. Watched the road. She looked down at her hands, at the blood on her fingers from where she'd braced herself during the crash, at the smoke-stained cuffs of a blazer she'd put on that morning without any idea what the day was about to ask of her. And she thought, in the way a person thinks when the adrenaline is starting to drop and the reality of what almost happened is starting to arrive, she thought about the fact that she had been sitting in that SUV for 11 minutes before Ethan Walker showed up. 11 minutes, she had counted. 16 vehicles had passed her. Some slowed down. Some even stopped briefly. But the fire was close. The smoke was thick, and everyone had made the same calculation in the end. Not worth the risk. And then this man, this mechanic in a faded Ford, with a worn-down multi-tool on his key ring, had stopped. Not just stopped. Had broken her window and pulled her out and run through smoke and heat, and had done all of it in under 4 minutes, and had asked for absolutely nothing, and had not even known her name. She pressed her lips together, looked out the window at the mountains. "Do you have family?" she asked. "A daughter, 10 years old. She's at home. She's safe." A pause. "She's going to be pretty mad about dinner being late." Olivia almost laughed. The sound that came out wasn't quite a laugh, more like the beginning of one, catching in her throat. "What's her name?" "Mia." "Does Mia know you do things like this?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I try to teach her that you do the right thing whether anyone's watching or not," he said. "Hard to teach something you won't practice." Olivia turned and looked at him fully. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the road, both hands steady on the wheel, completely calm in the way of a man who has learned through hard experience that panic doesn't solve problems. She had spent 20 years in boardrooms studying people. She had learned to read faces, read postures, read the microscopics that revealed what a person actually wanted as opposed to what they were pretending to want. Ethan Walker was the clearest person she had ever read. He wasn't performing anything. He wasn't calculating anything. He was just present, and she realized, sitting in that smoke-smelling truck on a burning mountain, that she could not remember the last time she'd met someone like that. They reached the emergency staging area 40 minutes later. Ethan pulled the truck to a stop near a row of ambulances and fire command vehicles. And before the engine was even off, a paramedic was at Olivia's door. He helped her out. She took 3 steps, then turned around. Ethan was still in the truck, both hands resting on the steering wheel, watching to make sure she got where she needed to go. Like he was just going to drop her off and drive away. Like that was a reasonable thing to do. "Ethan." He looked at her. "You should get checked out too," she said. "Your hands." He looked down. His palms, he realized, had a few burns minor. The kind you don't notice until the adrenaline drops. He hadn't even felt them. "I'm fine," he said. "Please." He looked at her, looked at the paramedic, looked back at her. Something in her voice not demanding, not executive, just human, made him get out of the truck. They sat in side-by-side folding chairs behind an ambulance, while a paramedic dressed his hands and a second one cleaned the cut on Olivia's forehead. And neither of them said very much, because there was something happening in the silence that felt more important than words. Around them, the emergency response was unfolding, radios crackling, helicopters in the distance, the coordinated chaos of people trying to get ahead of something that was still growing. Ethan watched it all. Old habits. He was counting personnel, noting gaps, thinking about the road he'd come down and the families he'd seen on foot and whether the evacuation perimeter was far enough back. Olivia watched him watching. You've done this before, she said. It wasn't a question. He hesitated a half-second too long. What makes you say that? The way you moved. Back there. She paused. You weren't scared. I was scared. You didn't act like it. Scared and frozen aren't the same thing. She thought about that. No, she said slowly. They're not. He looked at her. You weren't frozen either. When I told you to move, you moved. A lot of people don't. She held his gaze. Something passed between them two people, recognizing something in each other. Something they weren't sure how to name yet. I had a good reason to move, she said. So did you, he replied quietly. She frowned slightly. What's your reason? He looked at the mountains, at the smoke still rising in the distance. I've got a 10-year-old at home who needs her dad to come back in one piece, he said. That's always my reason. Olivia was quiet for a moment. I don't have that, she said. Not sad exactly. Matter of fact. The way a person states something they've long since made peace with. I have a company. I have a board. She stopped. I have people who need me functional. That's not the same thing. No, she said. It's not. The paramedic finished with his hands. Told him to keep them clean and wrapped. Ethan thanked him the way he thanked everyone simply. Directly. Without flourish, he stood up. Looked at Olivia. You'll be taken care of from here, he said. I know. She stood as well. Extended her hand. Thank you, I mean that. He shook it. Firm, brief. Get that head looked at properly, he said. Not just the bandage. The whole thing, I will. He nodded. Turned toward his truck. Ethan. He stopped. She was standing with her hands at her sides. The cut on her forehead freshly bandaged, her blazer torn, her hair falling out of its arrangement. And she looked for the first time all afternoon like someone who didn't know what to say. I'm going to find out what I can do, she said. To help. After this, you don't owe me anything. I know I don't. A pause. That's not why. He looked at her for a moment longer. Then he got in his truck and drove home to make his daughter dinner. Mia was sitting on the front steps when he pulled up. Arms crossed, backpack still on, like she'd just walked home from a friend's house. She looked at him, at the bandages on his hands, at the smoke-stained shirt, at the rearview mirror still angled wrong, from when he'd been driving blind through the evacuation. Dad, she said. Hey. Bug, you went back in, didn't you? It wasn't a question either. He got out of the truck and crouched down in front of her so they were eye level. Someone needed help, he said. She stared at him for a long moment. Her mother's dark eyes, his stubborn jaw. Then she put both arms around his neck and held on very tight. He wrapped his bandaged hands around her and held her back. I made mac and cheese, she said into his shoulder. Muffled, yeah? From the box, it's terrible. Sounds perfect. They sat like that for a while. In the driveway, while the sky in the west was still stained with smoke, and somewhere up in those mountains, people were still fighting a fire that had changed direction without warning. Ethan held his daughter, and for the first time all day, he let himself feel what had almost happened. Not to Olivia, to him. How close he'd been to the thing that had swallowed Claire. How easy it would have been to keep driving. How glad he was that he hadn't. Dad? Yeah. Was she okay? The person you helped? He thought about Olivia's eyes. That look in the truck. The way she'd said I have a company like she was confessing something. She was okay, he said. She's going to be fine. Good. He kissed the top of Mia's head. Let's go eat some terrible mac and cheese. It really is bad, I believe you. They went inside. The door closed behind them. Outside, the sky darkened slowly, and the smoke kept rising. And a woman in a tent at an emergency staging area, 40 miles away, sat alone with her phone in her hand, her assistant calling, her board calling, her PR team calling, and she let every single one of them go to voicemail. She was thinking about something else. She was thinking about a man who had turned around when everyone else kept going. About the way he'd said because someone needed help like it was the simplest answer in the world. About a 10-year-old girl named Mia, who was waiting at home. About the 16 cars that had passed her. About what that said about the world. And about what he said about it. She set the phone face down on the cot, stared at the ceiling of the tent, took a slow breath, and began quietly. Without fanfare, without an agenda to think about who she wanted to be when this was all over. 3 days after the wildfire, Ethan Walker sat at his kitchen table at 6 in the morning and stared at a bill he couldn't pay. It wasn't dramatic. There was no moment of collapse, no fist through the wall. He just sat there with a cup of coffee going cold beside him and looked at the number on the paper and did the math in his head the same way he'd been doing it for the past 72 hours, hoping somehow the answer would change. It didn't change. The fire had taken his truck. Not completely, it was still technically drivable, but the heat damage to the engine had done something. Ethan couldn't fix himself. And the estimate from the only other mechanic in the county had come back at $4,200. His shop had survived, but 2 of the hydraulic lifts had been damaged when embers caught the roof of the lean-to-shed out back, and replacing both of them was another $6,000. His savings account had $2,000 and change. He'd already moved money around twice, robbing Peter to pay Paul the way you do when you've been living close to the edge, long enough that it becomes a kind of muscle memory. Mia came downstairs at 6:15 in her soccer jersey and stopped in the doorway when she saw his face. How bad? He looked up. What? The bills. She walked to the refrigerator, pulled out the orange juice, poured herself a glass. You only sit like that when it's about money. He almost and said he was fine. He almost said, don't worry about it. He'd said both of those things so many times over the past 4 years, they'd started to feel like lies even to him. Instead, he said, Ed, it's tight right now. We'll work through it. She sat down across from him, looked at the paper, looked at him. Is the shop going to be okay? Yes. Are you going to have to sell something? No. Dad. Mia. She set her juice glass down. I have $40 in my drawer. From birthday money. You can have it. Something in his chest moved in a way he wasn't prepared for. Keep your $40, he said. I don't need it for anything, Mia. Keep the money. She studied him for a moment with those old soul eyes of hers. The ones that always made him feel like she was the parent, and he was the kid trying to get away with something. Okay, she said finally, but I want you to know the offer stands. He reached across the table and squeezed her hand once. Then she finished her juice and went upstairs to get her backpack. And Ethan sat alone with the bill and his cold coffee, and the particular silence of a man who has run out of obvious solutions. He didn't think about Olivia Bennett, not yet. That wasn't who he was. He thought about which jobs he could push through the shop fastest this week. He thought about the Delgado family 3 streets over who'd asked him to look at their minivan, and the ranger station that had been calling about a brake job on 2 of their vehicles since May. He thought about whether he could get all of it done before Friday and whether Friday's cash flow would be enough to buy him another 2 weeks. That was the math Ethan Walker was doing at 6 in the morning 3 days after running into a wildfire and saving a billionaire's life. $4,200. He picked up his coffee, drank it cold, got up, got to work. He didn't know that 40 miles away, in a hotel suite in Portland that cost more per night than his monthly mortgage, Olivia Bennett was also awake at 6 in the morning, also sitting at a table, also staring at something. But what she was staring at was different. She was staring at a photograph someone on her security team had taken at the emergency staging area, a candid shot. Not posed, not intended for anything. Just documentation. Standard protocol after an incident involving a principal. The photograph showed Ethan Walker sitting in a folding chair behind an ambulance, letting a paramedic wrap his burned hands, not looking at the camera, not looking at Olivia, just looking out at the mountains, with the expression of a man who had already moved on to thinking about the next problem. She'd been looking at that photograph for 20 minutes. Her phone had 47 unread messages. Her assistant had sent 3 priority flags overnight. Her board chairman had called twice. There was a statement to approve, a press inquiry to manage, a deposition prep session scheduled for 9 a.m. that she had completely forgotten about until her calendar of alarm went off at 5:30 and yanked her out of a dreamless sleep. She hadn't responded to any of it. She zoomed in on the photograph, on his hands, On the burn, she'd watched the paramedic clean, which Ethan had sat through, without flinching, without complaining, without making a single sound. Her Kuo knocked on the suite door at 6:30. Marcus Webb, 40 years old. Harvard MBA, the most efficient human being Olivia had ever met, which was exactly why she'd hired him. "The car is downstairs at 8, he said through the door. "And legal wants 20 minutes before the deposition prep." "I need you to find someone for me," she said. A pause. "Find someone," he repeated. Not a question exactly, just making sure he'd heard correctly. "A mechanic. His name is Ethan Walker. He runs a shop called Walker Auto and Repair in Ridgemont, Oregon. I need his current situation, financial, business, personal circumstances, whatever is publicly available." Another pause. Longer. "Olivia, the deposition is at 9. You have 2 hours. That's enough time." She heard him start to say something. Stop himself, recalibrate. "I'll have something for you by 8, he said. She went back to the photograph. Marcus had it to her by 7:45. She read it in the car on the way to the legal office, while her attorney talked at her about exposure and liability and the importance of controlling the narrative. And she nodded at the right intervals and heard almost none of it. Ethan Walker, age 35, widower, one daughter, Mia, age 10, sole proprietor of Walker Auto and Repair, operating for 6 years in Ridgemont, a town of approximately 4,000 people in the Cascades. Annual revenue consistently in the low to mid 5 figures, enough to survive. Not enough to grow. No debt except a mortgage and a small business line of credit, currently drawn at 70%. Former volunteer emergency responder with the Cascade Valley Fire Auxiliary for 7 years, until the death of his wife, Claire Walker, 4 years prior. No record of any kind. No social media presence. Not a single news mention before 3 days ago. Marcus had attached a note at the bottom, because Marcus was thorough. Fire damage assessment for his property. Truck engine, 2 hydraulic lifts. Rough estimate, 8 to 10,000 in losses not covered by his business insurance policy, which carries a $1,500 deductible and excludes wildfire-adjacent incidents per Clause 14B. He has approximately 2,000 in liquid savings. Olivia read that last line twice. He had saved her life, and he was going to lose his shop over it. She put the phone down in her lap, looked out the window at the Portland skyline moving past. At the ordinary Tuesday morning, happening on the other side of the glass, people walking to coffee shops, riding bikes, standing at crosswalks with their phones out. Olivia. Her attorney touched her arm gently. "I need you with me for the next hour. Can you be with me?" She looked at him. "I need to make one call first," she said. "The deposition. It'll take 3 minutes." She called Marcus. "The shop losses," she said when he picked up. 8 to 10,000. "I want it covered today. Anonymous transfer through the foundation account. No press release, no announcement, no conditions attached. Just make it happen." A pause. "Anonymous," Marcus said. "He won't know it's from you. That's the point." She hung up. Her attorney was looking at her with an expression she just recognized, the look people get when they're trying to decide whether to say something or not. He decided not to. Smart man. She put the phone in her bag. "Okay," she said. "I'm with you." But she wasn't. Not entirely. Part of her was still in a beat-up Ford pickup truck on a mountain road, listening to a man explain in 8 words why he'd just risked his life for a stranger. Because someone needed help. She'd been in business for 20 years. She'd hired thousands of people. She'd sat across the table from some of the most strategically brilliant minds in American industry and watched them construct arguments and positions and long games that spanned years. Nobody had ever answered a question the way Ethan Walker had answered that one. No subtext, no angle, no calculation underneath it, just the thing itself. She thought about that for a long time. The anonymous transfer landed in Ethan's business account at 11:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, flagged in his banking app as a deposit from something called the Pacific Community Relief Foundation. He stared at it for a full minute, convinced it was an error. $11,250. He called the bank. The representative confirmed the deposit was legitimate, originating from a registered nonprofit, no strings attached, no requirement to respond. Ethan sat on his rolling stool in the middle of the shop with his phone in his grease-stained hand and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Not relief exactly. Relief was too simple. This was something more complicated: gratitude, tangled up with discomfort. Because accepting help from people was something Ethan Walker had never been particularly good at. He didn't know it was from her. He genuinely had no idea. He assumed it was some kind of emergency relief fund. The kind that gets set up after natural disasters. The kind he'd seen announced on the local news. He made a mental note to write a thank you letter to whatever organization had sent it, which he did that evening, sitting at the kitchen table after Mia went to bed. In his careful, unflashy handwriting, he wrote, "I didn't expect this and I want you to know it matters. I'll pay it forward." He mailed it the next morning. Meanwhile, Olivia Bennett was doing something she almost never did. She was asking questions she didn't have answers to. Not in a boardroom. Not in a strategy session. In the hotel suite, alone at 11 o'clock at night, sitting cross-legged on the bed in a bathrobe, with a glass of wine she wasn't drinking, turning a single question over and over, like a stone she couldn't put down. When did I stop being the kind of person who stops? Because she used to be. She was sure of it. Or she thought she was sure of it. Back before the company became what it was. Before the board and the quarterly calls and the Forbes profiles and the security detail. She'd been someone who pulled over when she saw an accident. Someone who stayed late to help a colleague. Someone who did things because they were right and not because they were strategic. She couldn't remember exactly when that person had gone underground. But she knew Ethan Walker hadn't lost that person. Not even after losing his wife. Not even after 4 years of doing it alone. On a budget held together with duct tape and stubbornness. He'd driven back into a fire because someone needed help. And then he'd driven home and made his kid dinner and paid his bills and not told a single person. She knew he hadn't told anyone because Marcus had checked. No social media. No calls to local news. Nothing. He'd just done it and moved on. She finished the wine she wasn't drinking, set the glass down, and picked up her phone. She stared at Marcus's contact for a while. Then she put the phone down without calling. Then she picked it up again. She did not call Marcus. She called her sister, Rachel, in Seattle, who answered on the third ring, sounding groggy and surprised, because Olivia hadn't called her at 11 p.m. or really at all. In recent memory, without a specific reason. "Liv? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. It's 11 o'clock. I know. I just started again."
"When's the last time I called you just to talk?"
A long silence. "I don't know," Rachel said. "A while. A while meaning what?" "A while meaning I actually can't remember." Olivia closed her eyes. "I almost died 4 days ago," she said. She heard Rachel sit up. Heard the shift in the background sound sheets. A lamp clicking on. "What?" Rachel said. "What do you mean?" "The wildfire? I saw something on the news, but they said you were fine. I was fine. I am fine. Someone got me out." A pause. "A man I'd never met before. He drove back into the fire to get me. God. Liv. He's a mechanic. Single dad. He has a 10-year-old daughter. He spent 7 years as a volunteer fire responder. And nobody in his town even knows about it. Olivia, he didn't want anything from me. He didn't even know who I was. She pressed her lips together. He just stopped." Rachel was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Why are you telling me this at 11 at night?" "Because I don't know what to do with it," Olivia said. "And you're the only person I know who might understand that." Another silence. Different from the first one. "What do you want to do with it?" Rachel asked. Olivia looked at the ceiling. "I want to do something real," she said. "Not a donation. Not a press release. Something real." "Then do something real." "That's not that simple. Everything I touch turns into a strategy?" The word landed flat and true. "Yes," Olivia said quietly. "Then do something that isn't a strategy." "I don't know how to do that anymore." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. "Yes, you do," Rachel said. "You just forgot." Olivia didn't sleep much. That night, she lay in the hotel bed and thought about what forgetting looked like, and whether it was fixable and what fixing it would actually require. She thought about her company, 12,000 employees, operations in 19 countries, a stock price that fluctuated based on things she said in public. She thought about the weight of that, the permanence of it, the way it had become something she carried rather than something she chose. She'd chosen it once. She'd built it from a two-person startup in a rented office in Palo Alto, with her own hands and her own stubbornness and a vision she'd believed in so deeply she could feel it in her sternum. She'd chosen it every day for the first 10 years. Somewhere in the second decade, it had started choosing her. She wasn't sure when the shift had happened, but lying in the dark at 1 a.m, she was very sure of what Ethan Walker was. He was a mirror, and she didn't entirely like what she saw in it. 3 weeks after the fire, Ethan got a call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He was under a Silverado with his hands full of exhaust manifold gasket, but something made him wipe his hands on his jeans and pick up. "Is this Ethan Walker?" "Speaking. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm calling on behalf of Olivia Bennett." Ethan set down the gasket. "Okay," he said. "Ms. Bennett would like to meet with you. At your convenience. She's prepared to come to Ridgemont. If that's easier." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "She doesn't need to do that," he said. "She's aware she doesn't need to. She'd like to. Is this about—" He stopped, thought about the anonymous deposit. The Pacific Community Relief Foundation. He'd Googled it the week before. Found it was real, an established nonprofit, nothing obviously connected to Bennett Technologies. He'd eyeballed it under lucky timing and moved on. "What is this about?" "Ms. Bennett would prefer to explain in person," Marcus said. "She said to tell you it's not about money, and that if you say no, she'll respect that completely." Another silence. "She'll come here?" Ethan said. "If that's what works for you." He looked around the shop, at the rebuilt hydraulic lifts, at the Silverado with its guts half exposed, at the faded sign visible through the open bay door. "Wednesday works," he said. "Mornings are better. Before 10 and 0. He hung up, went back under the Silverado, lay there on his back with his hands on the manifold and the fluorescent shop light buzzing above him, and thought about the last time someone had offered to come to him, instead of expecting him to come to them. He couldn't think of one. Olivia arrived on Wednesday at 8:50 a.m. in a black SUV, not the same model as the one that had burned. He noticed, driven by a single security person who stayed in the vehicle. She came alone, wearing jeans and a simple jacket. No blazer, no heels. Nothing that looked like armor. He was at the coffee maker when he heard the tires on the gravel. He poured 2 cups, walked out. She looked different from the staging area, less stripped down by crisis. More herself, he supposed, whatever that meant. Composed but not rigid. She stood next to the SUV and looked at the shop sign and then at him. And her expression was something he couldn't quite read, but that felt honest. "Thank you for seeing me," she said. "You drove 4 hours." "I did. You want coffee?" "Very much." "Yes." They sat in the 2 plastic chairs he kept just inside the bay door, the ones he used when customers waited, and drank coffee from mismatched mugs and said nothing for a little while. He let the silence sit. He was comfortable with silence. He suspected she usually wasn't, but she handled it better than he expected. "How are your hands?" she asked. He flexed them once. "Good." "Really?" "Really. Minor burns. Nothing that mattered." She looked at his hands, then looked away. "I transferred money to your business account 3 weeks ago," she said, "through the Pacific Community Relief Foundation. I know you Googled it." He looked at her. "It's a real foundation," she said. "I fund it. But the transfer was real and unconditional, and I didn't attach my name to it because I didn't want you to feel like it was a transaction." The word settled over him. A transaction. He turned it over in his head. "Okay," he said. "I'm not telling you now to get credit for it," she said. "I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know the truth of where it came from. And because—" She stopped, recalibrated. "Because I think the way I tried to help you anonymously says something about me that I'm not entirely proud of." He frowned slightly. "You thought I'd refuse it. I thought you'd refuse it." "I would've," he said. I know. So. So I did something calculated even when I was trying not to. And I've been thinking about that. He studied her for a moment. The way she held the coffee mug with both hands. Not performing casualness. Actually needing the warmth of it. The way she'd driven 4 hours and shown up in jeans and sat in a plastic chair without a single person around her, except a driver waiting in a car. He thought about what that cost someone like her. Why are you really here? He said. She looked at him directly. No lag. Deflection. Because I want to understand something, she said. And I can't understand it from a hotel suite in Portland. What do you want to understand? She was quiet for a moment. You had every reason to keep driving, she said. The road was clearing. You had your daughter at home. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. A pause. 16 people drove past me. I counted, and every single one of them made a rational decision. You made an irrational one. She looked at the mountains visible above the tree line beyond his property. Then back at him. I've built a company on rational decisions. I've been praised for it my entire career. And sitting in your truck that afternoon, I couldn't decide whether the rational people were the ones who had it right, or whether I'd been inside a building full of rational people for so long that I'd forgotten what the other kind looked like. He didn't answer immediately. He drank his coffee. Let the question breathe. The thing about rational decisions, he said finally, is they work great when the math is about you. They break down when someone else is in the equation. She stopped. You didn't even have to think about that. I've had a lot of quiet mornings, he said. You think about things, she laughed. A real one. Small and surprised, the first one he'd heard from her. And in that moment, something shifted. Not dramatically. Nothing announced itself. It was the kind of shift you only identify later. Looking back when you understand what it was the beginning of. 2 people in plastic chairs outside a mechanic shop in a small Oregon mountain town. Drinking bad coffee and having a conversation that neither of them had planned. About a question that didn't have a clean answer. I want to offer you something, she said. And I want to be very clear that you are allowed to say no. I will not be offended, and I will not push. Okay. My company has been trying to build a community emergency response initiative for 2 years. Not a PR initiative, an actual operational one. Working with rural counties that don't have the resources to handle climate-related disasters. We keep getting it wrong because everyone we hire to run it knows policy and logistics and absolutely nothing about the communities themselves. She looked at him. I want you to consult. Not full-time. Not a relocation. Just your perspective on what these communities actually need. What works at the ground level. What doesn't. What someone like me misses when I try to help from 40,000 feet. Ethan was quiet. I'm a mechanic, he said. I know what you are. I don't have a degree. I don't know policy. I can't, Ethan. Her voice was even. You ran into a wildfire and extracted a person from a burning vehicle using a multi-tool on a keychain. You've been quietly repairing emergency vehicles, helping your neighbors, and building the exact kind of community resilience that billion-dollar programs fail to create. And you've been doing it for free because it was the right thing to do. She paused. I'm not looking for someone who knows policy. I have 40 people who know policy. I'm looking for someone who knows what right actually looks like. The shop was quiet except for the sound of the wind in the trees above the lot and the distant bark of someone's dog on the next street over. Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. He thought about Mia at the kitchen table. You can have my $40. He thought about Claire, about the version of himself that used to believe you could build something, not just maintain it. He thought about the bill on the kitchen table 3 weeks ago. About the math that never quite worked out. About what it would mean for Mia if it stopped working out. And he thought about the look in Olivia's eyes right now, not the CEO look. Not the strategic look, but the look of someone who had been handed something they didn't have words for and was trying, clumsily and earnestly, to figure out what to do with it. I'd want to stay in Ridgemont, he said. Of course. And Mia comes first. Always. I would expect nothing less. And if I tell you something's wrong with your program, I'm going to tell you straight. I'm not going to soften it because you're writing the checks. She nodded. Son, that's exactly what I need. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them looked away. Let me think about it, he said. Take as much time as you need. He did think about it. For 3 days. He thought about almost nothing else. He thought about it while he was under cars, and while he was eating breakfast, and while he was watching Mia practice free kicks in the backyard. He thought about it from every angle he could find, testing each one the way he tested a repaired joint, applying pressure, looking for the place it would give. On Saturday morning, he called the number Marcus had given him. I'm in, he said. When Olivia picked up, conditionally, name them, she said. Ridgemont stays my base. The shop stays open. Agreed. I consult on the program design. If I say something's not going to work, we stop and we rethink it. Nobody overrules me on the ground level stuff without a real conversation first. Agreed. And he paused. And I'm going to need you to explain to my daughter that her dad isn't losing his mind. A short silence. Then Olivia laughed, that real small, surprised laugh again. I can do that, she said. She's going to ask you hard questions. I've survived harder. You haven't met Mia. Another laugh. He held the phone and looked out the kitchen window at the mountains. Still scarred from the fire. Still smoking in the lower elevations, if you looked at the right angle on the right day. But already something green and insistent was pushing through the black. The way it always did. The way it refused not to. Ethan, Olivia said. Yeah, thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. I'm going to be difficult. I'm counting on it. The first day Ethan showed up to Bennett Technologies' Portland office. He wore the same thing he wore to the shop, clean jeans. A gray work shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. Boots that had seen better decades. He'd driven the 3 hours himself. Left at 5 in the morning so he could be back before Mia got home from school. And he'd parked the repaired F-250 in the visitor garage next to a row of Tesla Model S's and a Porsche SUV that probably cost more than his house. He stood in the lobby for about 45 seconds before anyone approached him. The receptionist, young, polished, the kind of professionally warm that gets trained rather than grown, looked at him the way people look at something that doesn't quite fit the picture they were expecting. Can I help you? She said. Ethan Walker. I'm here to see Marcus Webb. She typed something, looked at the screen, looked at him again. Of course, she said. Her tone shifting just slightly, recalibrating. He's expecting you. I'll let him know you're here. Ethan stood in the center of the lobby and looked around. Not because he was impressed, because he was cataloging. That was the thing about being trained. As a first responder, you never stopped reading a space for its weak points. Its choke points, the places where things could go wrong. What he saw was a building that had been designed to communicate power without appearing to try. High ceilings, expensive materials disguised as simple ones. Art on the walls that cost more than most people's annual salaries, but looked, at first glance, like something a college student might own. Everything about this building was saying something, and everything it was saying was calculated. He thought about his shop sign, the faded red letters, the ones he kept meaning to repaint. Marcus appeared at 9:08, which told Ethan something about the kind of man. He was not late enough to be disrespectful, not early enough to seem eager. Precision as a power move. Ethan recognized it, without naming it. Mr. Walker. Firm handshake, direct eye contact. Marcus Webb. Thank you for coming, Ethan, he said. Mr. Walker was my father. Marcus almost smiled. Ethan. Olivia is in the strategy session until 10, but wanted me to get you oriented. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water? I'm fine. He paused. Actually, coffee. Black, of course. They walked through the building. And Marcus talked. And Ethan listened in the particular way he'd developed over years of diagnosing engines, not to the words exactly, but to what the words were doing, what they were covering, what they were leaving out. The Community Emergency Response Initiative had been in development for 2 years. It had a team of 11 people, a budget Ethan suspected was larger than the GDP of some small countries. A carefully constructed framework involving 17 rural Oregon and Washington counties. And precisely 0 results to show for any of it. The framework is solid, Marcus said. The relationships with the county offices are in place. We have data on resource gaps, infrastructure vulnerabilities, population risk assessments. Who built the framework? Ethan said. Marcus paused. Our policy team, in consultation with disaster management consultants out of D.C. Have any of them been to Ridgemont? A beat. I believe a team visited several of the pilot counties last spring. Visited, Ethan said. How long? I'd have to check. A few days, I think, in each location. Ethan nodded slowly, drank his coffee, said nothing else. Marcus looked at him sideways. You already see the problem. I see one of them, Ethan said. They found Olivia at 10:15 when the strategy session ended, and she appeared in the doorway of the conference room and saw Ethan standing in the hallway with a coffee cup and the same calm, assessing expression he'd worn in the truck on the mountain road. Something in her posture changed when she saw him, not visibly. Not in a way anyone else would catch, but Ethan caught it. Relief, he thought. She'd been worried he wouldn't come. You made it, she said. Said I would. She looked at Marcus. Good morning went well. He diagnosed the program's primary failure in about 4 minutes, Marcus said. Not without some admiration. Olivia raised an eyebrow at Ethan. You sent city people to study small towns for a few days, and then built a system based on what they saw, Ethan said. And what you see in a few days is what people show you, not how things actually work. She walked toward him, leaned against the hallway wall. Okay, so what do we do instead? You stop trying to understand these places from the outside, he said. And you start listening to the people who've been holding them together from the inside. She studied him. People like you, she said. People nothing like me, he said. I'm the mechanic. There are school teachers, volunteer EMTs, church administrators, the woman who runs the food pantry out of her garage. Those are the people who know which family is one bad month from collapse, which road floods first, which neighbor will ignore an evacuation order because she doesn't trust government agencies. You want to build a real emergency response program. You talk to those people. A silence settled in the hallway. Marcus had his phone out. He was typing. Olivia was looking at Ethan with the expression he was beginning to recognize as her processing face, not blank, not emotional, something in between, like a person who was hearing something they already suspected but needed to hear out loud before they could act on it. That's going to take longer, she said. Yes, it's going to cost more. Probably. The board is going to push back on a longer timeline. That's your problem, he said. Not mine. You hired me to tell you what's true, not what's convenient. Another silence. Then Olivia looked at Marcus. Reschedule the framework review. I want to set up county visits, real ones. 2 weeks minimum per location. And I want Ethan on the planning calls. Marcus nodded. Already typing. One more thing, Ethan said. They both looked at him. I need to be home by 5 on Thursdays. Mia has soccer. Olivia looked at him for a moment. Then she said, with complete seriousness, I'll have it written into the contract. It was the first time Ethan smiled at her. Small, brief, but real. And she filed it away, like it was something she wanted to look at again later. The first county visit was 3 weeks after that. And it was to Harlan County in eastern Oregon, a place that hadn't seen significant outside investment in 15 years and had developed, as a result, the particular wariness of communities that have learned that people who show up with money and intentions tend to leave with neither. Ethan drove his own truck. Olivia followed in the company, SUV with Marcus and one other team member, a policy analyst named Diana, who had 3 degrees and was the fastest typer Ethan had ever seen, and who he suspected had never changed a tire in her life. The town's emergency coordinator was a man named Roy Gaines, 62 years old. Retired Forest Service, the kind of weathered that isn't an affectation. He met them in the parking lot of the town's only diner, looked at the group, and then looked specifically at Ethan. You're the one who pulled the Bennett woman out of the fire, Roy said. Not a question, news travels, Ethan said. Small counties. Roy shrugged. He looked at Olivia. Ma'am. Then back at Ethan. Coffee? They spent 6 hours with Roy that first day. And Ethan spent most of it listening, more than talking, which seemed to confuse Diana and impress no one except Roy, who noticed it the way a man notices something rare. Roy talked about the county's single ambulance 9 years old, one of the oxygen sensors throwing false readings for the past 8 months, parts on backorder. He talked about the volunteer fire department's average response time 14 minutes to the south end of county, which was fine, 26 minutes to the canyon roads, which was not. He talked about the county's emergency communication system, which ran on infrastructure installed in 2009 and had 2 dead zones that county administration had been aware of for 3 years and had not fixed. And then Roy stopped talking and looked at Olivia. "You want to know the real problem?" he said. "Yes," she said. "The real problem is that every time someone from outside comes in with a solution, the solution fits the outside person's idea of our problem, not our actual problem." He drank his coffee. "So you get a new emergency app that half the county can't run because they don't have smartphones. Or a supply cache put in the wrong location, because whoever picked the location used app instead of asking someone who drives these roads. Or a training program scheduled during harvest season because nobody thought to check the calendar." Olivia had her notebook open. She was writing. "What would you do with unlimited resources?" Ethan asked Roy. Roy looked at him. "Nobody's ever asked me that. I'm asking." Roy was quiet for a moment. Then he talked for 40 minutes straight. He talked about the ambulance and the communication towers and the training program that could be delivered by the county's own people if somebody just gave them the curriculum and the stipend. He talked about the mutual aid agreements with neighboring counties that technically existed on paper and practically fell apart every time they were tested because nobody had ever actually run a real exercise. He talked about the woman at the food pantry, he called her Doris, who knew more about which households were high risk than any database Bennett Technologies could build. If someone was willing to sit down with Doris and listen for a few hours. When he finished, Diana had filled 6 pages of notes. Marcus looked like he was mentally reconstructing the entire program architecture in real time. Olivia put her pen down and looked at Roy. "Would you be willing to be a formal advisor to this program?" she asked. Roy squinted at her. "What does that mean?" "Formally? It means we pay you for your time. We ask your opinion before we make decisions that affect this county. And when we get something wrong, which we will, you tell us directly, and we fix it." Roy looked at Ethan. Ethan shrugged one shoulder. "She means it," he said. "She's annoying that way." Roy almost smiled. It didn't quite make it all the way to his face, but it got close. "I'll think about it," Roy said. He called Marcus the next morning and said yes. Over the following 6 weeks, they visited 4 more counties, each one different. Each one carrying its own specific geography of need, not the need that showed up in data reports, but the human, granular, complicated need that you could only find by sitting in parking lots and diners and volunteer fire stations and talking to people who had stopped expecting anyone to actually listen. And something was happening to Ethan during those 6 weeks that he wasn't talking about and wasn't sure he had the vocabulary for. He was remembering something, not a specific memory, more like a feeling he'd forgotten he used to have. The feeling of building something, of moving toward a thing rather than just maintaining against entropy. He'd spent 4 years in maintenance mode, maintaining the shop, maintaining Mia's stability, maintaining the quiet life he'd constructed because it was safe, and it was enough, and it had to be enough because there wasn't anything else. But there was something else. He was beginning to feel it again. The problem was that feeling it, noticing other things too. It meant noticing the way Olivia laughed when she was genuinely surprised by something, not the polished, controlled version she deployed in professional settings, but the real one, the one that escaped before she could manage it. It meant noticing that she always remembered the names of the people they'd met in each county, every single one without notes. It meant noticing that when Roy Gaines talked, she leaned forward slightly, the way a person does when they're genuinely learning something as opposed to collecting information. He noticed these things, and he put them in the same internal drawer where he put things he wasn't ready to look at yet. The drawer was getting full. The moment he realized it was the evening of the Fifth County visit. In a small restaurant in Bend, Oregon, after a 12-hour day that had included a site visit, 3 community meetings, and an unplanned 2-hour conversation with a volunteer EMT, who turned out to know more about wilderness trauma response than anyone on Olivia's entire team. They were the last 2 at the table. Marcus had gone back to the hotel. Diana had taken her 6 pages of notes and her exhaustion and excused herself an hour earlier. It was 9:15 at night, and they were both drinking coffee they didn't need, because neither of them wanted to be the one to say the day was over. "You're different than I expected," Olivia said. He looked up. "What did you expect?" "I don't know exactly." Someone more. She searched for the word. Resistant. Resistant. Not to this. She gestured loosely at the space between them. "Meaning the work, meaning the past 6 weeks. I thought this world would feel wrong to you. The company, the resources, the money," he said. "Yes. It does feel wrong sometimes," he said. "I'm not going to pretend it doesn't." This afternoon in that conference room, with the leather chairs and the catered lunch, I kept thinking about Roy Gaines' ambulance with the broken oxygen sensor. He turned his coffee cup. "But the work doesn't feel wrong. The work feels like the first real thing I've done in a long time." She looked at him steadily. "What's the last real thing you did?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. He knew the answer immediately. But he had to decide whether to say it. "The morning after Claire died," he said. "I got up and I made Mia breakfast. She was 6. She didn't know yet. I hadn't figured out how to tell her." A pause. "And she asked for pancakes. So I made pancakes." He looked at the table. "That was the last time I was fully present for something. I think. Because she needed me to be, and that need was big enough to hold everything else back." The restaurant around them was quiet. A couple in the corner. A server folding napkins at the far end of the room. "And then," Olivia said quietly. "And then I learned to get through the days," he said. Which is different. She didn't say she was sorry. He appreciated that. People said they were sorry all the time, and it never helped. And she seemed to understand that instinctively. "I don't know how to get through days anymore," she said. "I know how to fill them." He looked at her. "What's the difference? Getting through a day means something about it matters personally. Filling it just means it's occupied." He thought about that for a moment. "How long have you been filling them?" "Longer than I realized until recently." She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "I sat in your truck after the fire, and I thought, when is the last time something happened to me that wasn't orchestrated? That wasn't part of some plan or strategy or managed narrative." She paused. "The fire was the first unorchestrated thing in years, and it almost killed me." "The unorchestrated thing that almost killed you also showed in something," he said. "Yes. Worth it?" She looked at him directly. "Ask me in a year," she said. Something moved between them. In the silence that followed, he felt it, and he chose, deliberately, to look away from it, to look at his coffee cup. At the table, at the check the server had left folded under the salt shaker. He picked up the check. "I've got it," she said immediately. "I know you've got it," he said. "I've got it." She started to say something and stopped. He left the money on the table and stood up. "Early start tomorrow," he said. "Yes." They walked out. The parking lot was quiet. His truck was parked 3 spaces from the company SUV. They stopped at the point where they diverged toward their respective vehicles and stood for a moment in the way people stand when a conversation hasn't quite finished, even though the words have. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. Thank you. For today." A pause. "For all of it, the last 6 weeks. You don't have to keep thanking me. I know." She met his eyes. "I want to." He nodded once. "Drive safe tomorrow," he said. "You too." He got in his truck and drove back toward his hotel and did not look in the rearview mirror. Which was a choice, and he knew it was a choice, and he made it anyway. That night he called Mia. She picked up on the second ring, which meant she'd been waiting for him to call. "Hey." "Bug." "Hey, how was today?" "Long, good." He sat on the edge of the hotel bed. "How was school?" "Fine. We got our science test back. I got a 92. That's my girl. Mrs. Patterson said it was one of the top scores. I'm not surprised. He could hear her smiling through the phone. You eating okay? Mrs. Delgado's been checking on you? She made me tamales last night. They were incredible. Better than mine? Dad, yours are from a packet. I seasoned the packet. That doesn't count. He laughed. The real kind. The kind that surprised him sometimes when it showed up. Dad? Yeah. Are you okay? You sound a pause. I don't know. Different. He looked at the wall of the hotel room. Different how? Like something is happening, she said. I don't know how to explain it better than that. He turned that over. His 10-year-old daughter, who had her mother's dark eyes and his stubborn jaw and enough emotional intelligence to make him feel slightly outmaneuvered on a regular basis, had heard something in his voice from 300 miles away that he hadn't said in words. Something is happening, he said. I think, good something or bad something. I genuinely don't know yet. A silence. Is it about the job? She asked. Partly. Another silence. Is it about her? Mia asked. He went very still. Mia, I'm not trying to make it weird, she said quickly. I'm just asking. He was quiet for a moment. Get some sleep, he said. Dad, it's a school night. Dad, good night. A pause. Then quietly, good night, Dad. He hung up and sat in the silence of the hotel room and thought about what his daughter had heard in his voice from 300 miles away. The following week, back in Ridgemont, the thing he'd been deliberately not looking at, decided it was done waiting. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Olivia had a program review session that was supposed to last 2 hours and turned into 4 because Roy Gaines joined by phone and the conversation took turns none of them had planned. By the time it wound down, it was almost 6, and Ethan realized with a start that Mia would be home. He called Mrs. Delgado, who confirmed Mia was there eating an after-school snack. He exhaled. Olivia was pulling on her jacket when she saw his face shift. Everything okay? She said. Mia got home. I lost track of time. She's fine. She's at the neighbor's. He paused. You want to meet her? The words came out before he'd made any conscious decision to say them. Olivia went still. Really, she said. He thought about taking it back. Decided not to. She's been asking about you, he said. And she will absolutely corner you the next time you're here if I don't make it official. Better to control the introduction. Olivia looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't entirely read. I'd like that, she said. Very much. They walked the half-block to the Delgado house. And Ethan knocked, and when the door opened, Mia appeared behind Mrs. Delgado with a cookie in her hand and her hair coming out of its braid. And she looked at her father, and then she looked at Olivia. Ethan watched his daughter process this. Mia Bennett, he caught himself. Mia Walker had extremely good instincts. She'd inherited them from both parents in different forms. She didn't rush to fill silences, and she didn't perform reactions, and she sized people up with a directness that made adults visibly uncomfortable sometimes. She looked at Olivia for about 4 seconds, then she said, You're the one my dad saved. I am, Olivia said. He never told me the whole story, Mia said. Looking at her father with mild accusation, he said it wasn't a big deal. He's understating it significantly, Olivia said. He does that. Mia bit her cookie, looked at Olivia again. Are you actually a billionaire? Mia, Ethan said. What? She knows she's a billionaire. Olivia looked like she was working hard not to smile. I am. Yes. Huh. Mia thought about this for a moment. Do you like being one? Sometimes, Olivia said. Less than I thought I would. Mia considered this answer seriously, tilted her head. Does it feel like you thought it would? Not at all. What does it feel like, Mia? Ethan said again, with a different inflection. It feels like a lot of responsibility for a lot of things you didn't intend to be responsible for, Olivia said. And like you can go a long time before you realize you've been lonely. The word landed in the doorway between them. Mia looked at her father, then back at Olivia. My dad's been lonely too, she said. He doesn't say it, but he is, Mia. His voice was quieter now. I'm not trying to embarrass you, she said to him, with a patience that was somehow both infuriating and completely pure. I'm just saying you guys have something in common. The silence on the doorstep was the specific kind that happens when a 10-year-old has said something that the adults in the room needed to hear, and nobody knows quite what to do next. Olivia looked at Ethan. He looked at the ground for a moment. Then he looked back at her. And this time, he didn't look away. "Come in," Mia said, stepping back from the door. Cookie in hand, completely unbothered by the weight of what she'd just dropped into the world. Mrs. Delgado made tamales. They're really good. Olivia looked at Ethan. He exhaled slowly. "She's right about the tamales," he said. And they went inside. The tamales were, in fact, excellent. Mrs. Delgado was 71 years old and had been feeding the Walker household in various unofficial capacities since Claire died. And she had the particular gift of knowing when a situation called for more food and fewer questions. She set 3 extra plates without being asked, poured coffee for Olivia without offering, and then disappeared into the back of the house with the practiced discretion of someone who understood exactly what kind of moment they were in the middle of. Mia sat across the table from Olivia and ate her tamale, and asked questions the way only a 10-year-old can, without any awareness that some of them were the kind of questions adults spent years carefully avoiding. "Do you have kids?" Mia asked. "No," Olivia said. "Did you want them, Mia?" Ethan said. "I'm not being rude, it's a real question." Olivia set her fork down, looked at Mia directly, the same way she looked at Roy Gaines when he was telling her something important. "I thought I'd get around to it, and then I kept not getting around to it. And now I'm 44, and the answer is probably no." Mia absorbed this. "Does that make you sad?" "Sometimes," Olivia said. "Less than I expected. My dad says the things that don't hurt as much as you thought they would are usually the things you weren't meant to have anyway." Olivia looked at Ethan. He was studying his tamal with great concentration. "Your dad is smarter than he lets on," Olivia said. "I know," Mia said. "He just doesn't like people to make a big deal out of it." "Also true," Olivia said. Ethan looked up to find both of them watching him with identical expressions of mild amusement. And he had the disorienting experience of feeling completely outnumbered in the best possible way. "I'm right here," he said. "We know," Mia said. "They stayed at the Delgado table for 2 hours. It wasn't planned. It just kept not being over." Mia asked Olivia about her company, genuinely curious. Not impressed, asking the kind of operational questions that surprised Olivia enough that she answered them fully instead of giving the polished version. What does a CEO actually do all day? Who tells you when you're wrong? What happens when you make a decision that turns out to be bad? Olivia answered everyone honestly, including the last one, which she said felt like swallowing glass. Slowly, the decision wasn't catastrophic all at once. It just kept cutting on the way down for months. Mia thought about that. My teacher says the worst mistakes are the ones you keep making smaller in your head until you don't fix them. Your teacher is right, Olivia said. She's kind of annoying about being right, Mia said. But yeah, when they finally stood to leave, Mia hugged Olivia. Not a polite hug, a real one. Arms around the middle. Held for a full 3 seconds. Olivia went briefly still. The way a person does when they haven't been hugged like that in a long time. And then she put her arms around the girl and held on. Ethan watched from the doorway and did not say anything, walking back to his house in the dark. Olivia beside him, neither of them speaking. He was aware of something settling into the space between them, not romantic exactly. Or not only that, but something larger and more complicated. Something that had to do with belonging, with the specific gravity of being known by someone in a way you hadn't planned on. She's remarkable, Olivia said. She is, he said. She gets it from you. She gets it from her mother, he said. I just try not to mess it up. Olivia stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before he realized it and turned. She was standing in the middle of the sidewalk, looking at him, with an expression he hadn't seen from her before, something unguarded. The kind of look that surfaces when a person stops managing themselves for a moment. What? He said. Do you know what you just did? He waited. You gave her credit. Out loud, without being asked. She paused. Most people who've been through what you've been through would take everything they can get credit for. He shrugged one shoulder. Claire earned it. I know. She stopped. That's the point, Ethan. He looked at her in the dark on the sidewalk, in his small Oregon town, and understood that something was being said that went beyond what the words were carrying. He also understood that he wasn't ready to respond to it yet. "It's late," he said. "You've got a long drive." She looked at him for one more moment. "Yes," she said, "I do." She drove away at 9:47 p.m., and Ethan stood on his porch and watched the taillights of the company SUV disappear around the corner. And then he went inside and sat at the kitchen table for a long time without turning on any lights. The next 8 weeks were the fastest Ethan could remember since before Claire died. The program moved from framework to action in a way that surprised everyone involved, including Marcus, who was not easily surprised. County by county, the listening sessions generated not just data but relationships, real ones. The kind that created accountability in both directions, where the community people felt heard enough to actually invest in the outcomes, and the Bennett team felt responsible enough to actually follow through. Roy Gaines became a central figure. He had a gift for cutting through the language that organizations use to make themselves feel sophisticated and getting to the plain truth of what a situation required. And he did it without apology and without ornament, which Ethan found deeply satisfying to watch. Olivia gave Roy more latitude than Ethan expected, more than Marcus was comfortable with. She overrode Marcus twice in 6 weeks on Roy's recommendations, and both times turned out to be the right call, and both times she said nothing about being right, which Ethan noticed and thought about more than he let on. She was changing. Not dramatically. This wasn't the kind of change that announces itself. It was the slower kind, the kind that happens in the details. She started taking her own notes instead of delegating it. She started asking for the rough numbers before the polished presentations. She started driving herself to the county visits rather than riding in the company SUV, which caused Marcus a quiet but visible level of distress. "You're different," Ethan told her one morning, in the cab of his truck on the way to a site in Douglas County, the company SUV following them at a distance. She glanced at him from the passenger seat. "Different how? You ask more questions than you did 6 weeks ago, and you wait longer for the answers." She was quiet for a moment. "Is that good?" she said. "In my experience," he said, "the people who wait for the answers are the ones who actually wanted to know." She turned and looked at the road through the windshield for a while. "My board noticed," she said. "Not the waiting, the overall." She gestured. "Shift. Gerald Whitmore, he's the chairman, he called me last week. Said there were concerns about my focus." Meaning? Meaning this program is taking time and attention that the board considers better spent on core business development. Meaning some of them think I'm having she paused, choosing the word carefully, a reaction to the near-death experience, and that I'll course correct once it passes. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Will you?" A long silence. "No," she said. "Then you've got a board problem." "I've had board problems before." "Not like this one," he said. "Because this time you're not going to move toward them." She looked at him. "How do you know that?" she said. He glanced at her briefly. "Because you drove up here in your own car, and you're sitting in my truck instead of the SUV, and you can't remember the last time you did either of those things, voluntarily." She turned back to the windshield. After a moment she said, "Gerald is calling an emergency board review. Next month. They want a full program assessment and a revised timeline. What are you going to tell them?" "The truth," she said. "That the program is working. That it's working because we stopped trying to impose a solution and started listening to the problem. And that pulling back now would mean abandoning 17 counties that have started to trust us, which is the hardest thing to build and the easiest thing to destroy. And if they push back, then I push harder." He almost smiled, kept it to himself. "Good," he said. The board meeting happened on a Thursday, which meant Ethan wasn't there because Mia had soccer, which was non-negotiable. He found out how it went from Marcus, who called him at 6:15 that evening with the particular tone of a man delivering complicated news. "Held the line," Marcus said. "Full program continuation. Revised timeline approved. 3 board members abstained. Gerald Whitmore voted against. How'd she do it? She showed them Roy's county assessment. The real one, not the polished version. The one Roy wrote himself in his own language, talking about specific families and specific roads and specific equipment failures. A pause. She said if they wanted to pull back from that, they needed to look Roy in the eye and explain why. And then she put Roy on speakerphone. Ethan set down the wrench he was holding. She put Roy on speakerphone, he said, in the middle of the boardroom. Marcus sounded like he was still processing this. Gerald Whitmore is not accustomed to being on the phone with a 62-year-old retired Forest Service coordinator from Eastern Oregon. No, Ethan said. I imagine he's not. Roy told them about the ambulance, Marcus, the oxygen sensor. He said, and I'm reading directly. If one of you had a son or daughter who called 911 from this county, you'd want that ambulance working. Don't tell me it's not in the budget until you're willing to say that out loud. Ethan was quiet for a moment. And, he said, Gerald approved the full equipment replacement budget for all 17 counties, Marcus said, unanimously. Ethan exhaled. Marcus, he said, yeah, tell Olivia that was the right move. She already knows, Marcus said. But I'll tell her you said so. He was on his porch at 8 that evening when his phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. It said only. Roy called it a miracle. I told him it was just math. He said that's exactly what a miracle is. Ethan read it twice. Then he typed back, Roy's growing on me. Her response came in under 30 seconds. He says the same about you. He also says you're both too stubborn to admit you're the same kind of person. Ethan looked at the mountains in the dusk. Typed, he's not wrong. He watched the 3 dots appear, disappear, appear again. Her message came. Neither are you. He put the phone in his pocket and sat with that for a while. 2 weeks later, the thing he'd been keeping at a careful distance arrived anyway. It arrived. As these things often do, not through some planned moment or cinematic confrontation, but through a Tuesday morning and a broken cop pot. Olivia had driven up for a working session, just her. No Marcus, no Diana, no driver. She'd been doing that more frequently. The solo drives. And Ethan had noticed without commenting on it. Which was its own kind of comment. He'd planned to have coffee ready when she arrived, but the coffee maker had chosen 7:50 a.m. to die definitively. And when she walked into the shop at 8, he handed her a mug of terrible instant, with a look that dared her to say anything about it. She took one sip. Her expression was heroic. It's fine, she said. It's terrible, he said. It's coffee. It's technically coffee. She sat down in the plastic chair, wrapped her hands around the mug. I'll survive. I survived a wildfire. Different kind of heat. She looked at him sharply, and he realized what he'd said, and they both held very still for exactly 1 second before he turned back to the parts manifest he'd been reviewing. That 1 second was a whole conversation. They worked through the morning program logistics, county timelines, a staffing question that had been unresolved for 2 weeks. They worked well together. They always had. In the particular way of 2 people who think differently enough to catch each other's blind spots, but not so differently that they're constantly translating. At 11:30, she took a call from Marcus that required her to move outside. And Ethan used the 15 minutes to do an oil change on a customer's Subaru because his hands needed something to do that wasn't related to Olivia Bennett. She came back in while he was still under the car. Everything okay? He said from underneath. Gerald Whitmore resigned from the board this morning, she said. He stopped, rolled out on the creeper, looked up at her. She was standing with her phone at her side, and her expression was the careful blank she used when she was managing something with a lot of layers. How are you feeling about it? He said. Honestly? She looked at the ceiling of the shop. Relieved. Which probably says something about the state of things. He sat up on the creeper, wiped his hands on the shop rag. Gerald was the one pushing hard against the program. Gerald was the one who'd been pushing hardest against everything I've tried to change in the past 2 years. She looked at him. His official reason for resigning was strategic differences. His actual reason is that I'm no longer making decisions the way he built his investment on. And what way is that? Predictably, she said. Safely. Without inconvenient variables. He looked at her. Are you one of the inconvenient variables? She almost laughed. Apparently. Good, he said. She stared at him. Good? She said. Gerald Whitmore built an investment on a version of you that you were outgrowing, Ethan said. Him leaving is just the math catching up with the reality. She sat down on the rolling stool across from him, looked at him for a long moment with the full weight of her attention, the kind that made most people uncomfortable. Ethan didn't look away. I need to tell you something, she said. His chest did something quiet and inconvenient. Okay, he said. I have a gala next month. Annual thing. It's the company's biggest fundraising event of the year. 500 people. Black tie, the whole performance. She paused. I want you to come. He blinked. That wasn't what he'd expected her to say. Olivia, before you say no, she said quickly. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. I'm not asking you to network or perform or pretend about the cocktail conversation. I'm asking you to be there. Because there's going to be a program announcement, the Community Emergency Initiative. The full launch, and the people in that room are going to decide whether they fund it or walk away. And I want, she stopped. Started again. I want you there when I talk about why this matters. Because you're why it matters. He looked at her. I'm a mechanic from Ridgemont, he said. I know what you are, she said. Exactly as she'd said it the first time. Months ago. In the plastic chair outside this same shop. But it sounded different now, heavier, more certain. He sat with it. I'd have to get a suit, he said. Yes. I don't own a suit, I know. I'm going to look like a mechanic in a suit. You're going to look like Ethan Walker in a suit, she said. Which is what I need in that room. He looked at her for a long time. She held his gaze without flinching. Without performing. Without doing any of the things he'd seen her do in professional settings when she wanted to land a point. She was just sitting on the rolling stool in his shop, holding a terrible cup of instant coffee, asking him for something real. Mia's going to want to pick the tie, he said. Olivia smiled. The real one. I was counting on it. He called Rachel Olivia's sister that same evening. Not because he had her number directly, but because Olivia had left her phone on his workbench when she went to take a call, and it had rung, and he'd seen Rachel's name and set it aside. And somehow that small ordinary detail, her sister calling, while she was in his shop, made something more real than any of the weeks before it. He didn't call Rachel. That part wasn't true. He didn't have her number. What he did was sit at his kitchen table, after Mia went to sleep, and look at the wall and think about Claire. Not with grief exactly. He'd moved through the worst of the grief years ago. In the particular way of a man who didn't have the luxury of stopping. Who had a 6-year-old waiting for pancakes in the morning. And bills due at the end of the month and engines that needed rebuilding whether his heart was broken or not. What he thought about was something Claire had said to him once. Early in their marriage, when he'd been hesitating about taking a risk on the shop. She'd said, Ethan, you know what your real problem is. You know exactly what the right move is, and you wait around hoping someone will tell you it's okay to make it. He'd laughed at the time, said she was wrong. She wasn't wrong. He'd known for several weeks what the thing between him and Olivia was. He'd been treating it like a problem to be managed, rather than a reality to be met. Because meeting it required him to open a part of himself he'd put in a room and closed the door, and told himself the room was fine sealed. The room was not fine sealed. He knew that too. He sat at the table until 11 p.m. Then he went to bed. The gala was on a Saturday in mid-November, in a hotel ballroom in Portland that had been transformed into something. Ethan didn't have a word for beautiful in the way of things that cost too much to be called anything else. But genuinely so, without apology, he'd driven himself, of course. Mia had chosen the tie navy blue, which she said matched his eyes, and which he'd worn because he didn't have a better argument. The suit was charcoal gray, bought from the one department store in the city where the salesperson hadn't made him feel like he'd walked into the wrong zip code. He walked in alone and stood at the edge of the room and looked at 500 people in formal wear and thought about Roy Gaines in his parking lot in Harlan County and found the contrast clarifying rather than alienating. Marcus found him within 3 minutes. She's been asking where you were, he said. I said 8. It's 7:58. Marcus looked at him. You're the most precise non-executive I've ever worked with. I'm a mechanic, Ethan said. Precision matters. Marcus almost smiled. She's at the east entrance. Come on. He saw her before she saw him. She was standing with a small group near a pillar, in a deep blue dress that was elegant without being theatrical, talking to two men in suits who were doing the thing that powerful men do when they're trying to figure out if a woman knows she's more impressive than them. She had her head tilted slightly, listening, and her expression was the polite professional one, composed, engaged, carefully managed. And then she looked up and saw Ethan. The managed expression dropped, not into anything dramatic, just into herself. The version of her he saw in the truck, in the diner, in the plastic chair outside his shop, the one that didn't perform. She said something brief to the two men, and crossed the room toward him. You're here, she said. Said I would be. She looked at him, the suit, the navy tie, all of it. Mia picked the tie, obviously. She laughed. The real one. He looked at her. He stopped. Didn't finish it. She waited. Good, he said. Good, she repeated, with a slight raise of an eyebrow. That meant she knew he'd pulled back from a stronger word and was choosing not to push. Ready for tonight? He asked. She took a breath. Something flickered across her face, not fear exactly, but the close cousin of it. The program announcement is at 9. I've given 1,000 presentations. I don't know why this one. Because this one is true, he said. She looked at him. All the others, he said. You were presenting what you'd built. Tonight you're presenting what you believe. Different muscle. She was quiet for a moment. Stay where I can see you, she said. When I'm on stage. I'll be in the back, he said. By the door. Of course you will, old habit. Exits. Always. She nodded once. Squared her shoulders, became, again, the version of herself that ran a 12,000-person company, and held board members accountable in public, and knew exactly which room she was in and what it needed from her. But she touched his arm before return. A brief. Just her hand on his forearm, through the suit jacket. 3 seconds, no more. He felt it for considerably longer than 3 seconds. At 9:15, Olivia walked onto the stage. The room settled. 500 people who'd been eating and drinking and networking and performing fell quiet in the way that rooms fall quiet when someone walks into a space with genuine authority, not the borrowed kind, not the titled kind, but the real kind that comes from knowing exactly what you're about to say and why it matters. She talked about the program for 20 minutes, but she didn't talk about it the way she talked about business initiatives. She talked about Roy Gaines and his ambulance. She talked about the woman named Doris and her garage food pantry. She talked about what happens when a fire changes direction and nobody's communication system reaches the canyon roads. She talked about what a county looks like from a data report and what it looks like when you sit in a diner for 6 hours and actually listen. And then she said, a man drove back into a wildfire to get me out of a burning vehicle. He wasn't paid. He wasn't asked. He wasn't even thanked for the first several minutes because I was too shocked to find the words. And when I finally did, when I asked him why he turned around when everyone else kept going, he said something so simple I've been turning it over in my head for 6 months. The room was absolutely still. Ethan was standing in the back, by the door, exactly where he'd said he'd be. She looked at him across the length of the ballroom. 500 people, all between them. She held his eyes and said, he said, because someone needed help. She paused. That's it. That's the whole answer. 8 words, no strategy, no calculus, no angle. Another pause. And I want to ask everyone in this room, when is the last time that was your answer? When is the last time you did something not because it was optimal or strategic or good for your brand, but simply because someone needed help and you were the person who was there? The silence in that room was the good kind, the kind that means something is landing. That man is here tonight, she said. He's in the back of the room, standing by the exit. Because that's where you stand when you've spent years, being the person who makes sure everyone else gets out first. He didn't move, didn't look around, kept her eyes. His name is Ethan Walker, she said, and because of what he showed me. And because of every person like him who has been holding their community together, without resources or recognition, or any expectation of either, we are launching the Cascade Community Emergency Initiative. Tonight. Fully funded. Across all 17 counties. Starting January 1st, the room applauded. And Ethan Walker stood in the back by the door, and felt something crack open in his chest in a way that was unfamiliar and not entirely comfortable and completely undeniably necessary. She found him afterward. In the 90 seconds between the stage and the receiving line that Marcus had built into her schedule with the precision of a military operation. She walked straight to where he was standing and stopped in front of him and looked up. "Well?" she said. He looked at her. "I told you not to make it about me," he said. "I know. I'm serious. I don't, Ethan." Her voice was quiet and direct, and landed in the exact center of the distance he was trying to keep. "I'm not making it about you. I'm making it about what you represent. There's a difference." He held her gaze. "Roy's going to tease me about this for years," he said. "Probably. Mia's going to want to see a recording. Definitely." He looked at her for a long moment. At the blue dress and the composed expression and the person underneath both of them, who'd driven 4 hours in her own car and sat in plastic chairs and drunk terrible coffee and let a 10-year-old ask her hard questions and answered every single one honestly. "You did good tonight," he said. "We did good," she said. "Precisely." Marcus appeared at her shoulder. Receiving line in 45 seconds. She didn't look at Marcus. She kept her eyes on Ethan after, she said. To Ethan. "Not a question," after he said. Marcus led her away into the crowd. And Ethan stood in his charcoal suit and his navy tie and watched her go. And thought about a morning 4 years ago when he'd gotten up and made pancakes for a 6-year-old who didn't what she'd lost. And how even then, in the worst of it, he'd known that the only direction was forward. He just hadn't known what forward looked like. He was beginning to. After the receiving line ended. It was 11:20 p.m., and the ballroom was thinning, and Olivia found Ethan exactly where she expected to find him, not at the bar. Not at a table, but standing near the side exit, with his jacket unbuttoned and his tie loosened and a glass of water in his hand. Watching the room the way he always watched rooms. Cataloging, assessing, making sure everyone was accounted for. She walked to him without stopping to talk to anyone else. Which Marcus noticed and filed away without comment, because Marcus had been noticing things for 3 months and had reached his own quiet conclusions. "Hungry?" she said. He looked at her. "It's almost midnight. There's a diner 2 blocks over. Open all night. You want to go to a diner at midnight. I want to go somewhere I don't have to perform," she said. "And diners are the one place where nobody performs." He looked at her for a moment. Then he set down the water glass. "Let me get my coat," he said. The diner was called Patty's, and it had the particular quality of late-night diners, everywhere, slightly too bright, slightly too warm, the smell of coffee that had been on the burner too long. A cook visible through the window over the counter who looked like he'd seen everything and been surprised by none of it. There were 4 other tables occupied. Nobody looked up when they came in. They took a booth in the back. The waitress, a woman in her 50s, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, came over, looked at Ethan's suit and Olivia's dress, and said without any ceremony, "You two look lost." "We're exactly where we need to be," Ethan said. She smiled at him in the way of a woman who can read a man accurately in under 10 seconds. "Coffee? Please," they said. Simultaneously. She left. They sat across from each other in a vinyl booth at 11:30 p.m. in Portland, Oregon, and for a moment neither of them said anything. And it was the most comfortable silence Ethan had felt since he couldn't remember when. "How do you feel?" he said. Olivia thought about it honestly. "Like something finished," she said, "and something else started. At the same time. That's usually how it works." She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug the waitress had set down without being asked. Gerald Whitmore called during the receiving line. Ethan went still. "What did he say?" He said. "The program announcement was a mistake, that I'd made the company sentimental. That sentiment doesn't scale." She looked at the coffee. He said I'd been compromised by a personal experience and that the board's patience had limits. He called you during your own gala. He's always had interesting timing. What did you say? She looked up. I said the program was fully funded. The board had approved it. And if his patience had limits, he was welcome to his resignation. A pause. Then I hung up and went back to shaking hands. Ethan looked at her. Good, he said. You keep saying that. You keep earning it. She held his gaze. Something in the air between them shifted the same shift he'd been feeling for months. The one that kept arriving, and that he kept choosing to let pass. Except tonight it didn't feel like it was going to let him choose. Can I ask you something? She said. Go ahead. What are we doing? Ethan? He was quiet. I'm not trying to make it complicated, she said. I know that's not your way. I'm just asking directly, because I think we've been circling something for long enough and I'd rather name it than keep pretending it's not there. He turned his coffee cup. I know what's there, he said. So do I. It's not simple. No, she said. It's not. You're in Ridgemont. I'm everywhere. You have Mia. I have a company that takes up most of the oxygen in any room it enters. And we come from, she gestured between them, different planets. Essentially, he agreed. So, she held his eyes. What do we do with that? He was quiet for long enough that the cook dropped something in the kitchen and the sound rang through the diner and faded. Claire used to say I wait for permission, he said, to do the things I already know I want to do. Olivia didn't move. She was right, he said. I do. Ethan, I'm not waiting anymore, he said. The words landed clean and simple. The way his words always did, without ornament or strategy. And she looked at him across the table in the Too Bright diner at 11:30 at night and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Seen. Fully. Without performance. Without the title or the company, or the carefully managed presentation of herself that she'd been maintaining for so long it had started to feel like skin. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, he said. The waitress refilled their coffee without being asked. They stayed until 1 in the morning talking about nothing important, Mia's soccer tournament. Roy's latest blunt assessment of a county policy, a book Olivia had been trying to finish for 3 months and kept abandoning. A memory Ethan had of taking Mia camping the summer before and getting completely lost for 4 hours and pretending it was intentional. They talk the way people talk when something has been resolved and the pressure has lifted, and what's left is just the pleasure of being in the same place as someone who understands you. They walked back to the hotel at 1:15, stopped at the point where the lobby split toward the elevator bank. Drive safe, she said. I'm not driving tonight, he said. Marcus insisted. I've got a room. She raised an eyebrow. Marcus insisted. He said something about liability and fatigue, and I stopped listening after the first sentence. He's usually right about those things. I know. I hate it. She laughed. Then she looked at him. And he looked at her, and they were standing in a hotel lobby at 1 in the morning in their formal wear, and it should have been awkward. And it wasn't. Because the thing that makes situation awkward is uncertainty, and there was none left between them. He leaned forward and kissed her once. Brief, just enough. She didn't move when he pulled back, just looked at him. Good night. Olivia, he said. Good night, Ethan, she said. He walked to the elevator. She watched him go, and for the first time in longer than she could calculate, she went to sleep without her phone on. January first arrived, the way significant date is always less ceremony than you expect and more wait than you're ready for. The Cascade Community Emergency Initiative launched across all 17 counties on a Tuesday morning, which was exactly the kind of undramatic timing Ethan would have chosen if anyone had asked him. No fanfare, no ribbon cutting, no press release, timed to the morning news cycle. Just 17 county coordinators, people like Roy, people who knew their communities from the inside, receiving the equipment, the funding, the training curriculum, and the direct line to a team that had committed, in writing, to answering the phone when they called. Roy called Ethan at 8:15 a.m. It's happening, Roy said. I know, Ethan said. The ambulance is getting the sensor replaced today. I heard. Doris got the supply cache. A pause, she cried. Don't tell her I told you. Wouldn't dream of it. Another pause. You did good. Walker. Ethan was in the shop standing next to the F-250 he'd been working on since 6. The same truck. Rebuilt engine. New paint on the sign out front finally, after years of meaning to. Red letters, sharp and clean. We all did, Ethan said. Don't deflect, Roy said. I was there from the beginning. I know how much of this was you holding the line when it would have been easier to let the corporate version win. Ethan looked at the sign through the open bay door. How's the county feeling, he said. Like people who've been waiting a long time to be taken seriously, Roy said. And like they're not sure yet whether to believe it. That's fair. Give it 6 months, Roy said. Actions over time. That's the only thing that convinces people like us. Agreed. Ethan. Yeah, that woman of yours did something real, Roy said. I don't give that out easy. Ethan was quiet for a moment. I know you don't, he said. Don't mess it up. Roy hung up. Ethan put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. Mia found out about the kiss the way Mia found out about most things, not through being told, but through paying attention. She didn't say anything for 2 weeks. She watched her father the way she'd always watched him, with those dark eyes that missed nothing, and she filed what she saw. He was lighter. Not dramatically, he was still Ethan. Still the man who fixed engines and made terrible instant coffee and paid bills the hard but lighter in the specific way of a person who's put something down that they'd been carrying for a long time without realizing how heavy it was. She waited until a Saturday morning in late January, when he was making breakfast and she was sitting at the kitchen table with her soccer cleats, retying the laces for the 4th time, which was what she did when she was building up to something. Dad. Yeah. Are you and Olivia? She stopped, retied the left eat. Are you guys like? Together? He flipped the eggs, didn't turn around. What makes you ask that? You smile at your phone now, she said. You never used to smile at your phone. He was quiet for a moment. It's early, he said. We're figuring it out. But you want to. Yeah, he said, I want to. Silence. The eggs sizzled. Dad. Yeah. Mom would have liked her, Mia said. She would have given her a hard time for the first month, and then she would have liked her. He turned around. Mia was looking at her cleats. Retying the right one now, not looking at him. Giving him the privacy of not having to perform a reaction. He crossed the kitchen and put his hand on top of her head for a moment. She didn't look up. I think so too, he said. She nodded. Once. Eggs are burning, she said. He went back to the stove. Olivia came to Ridgemont on a Sunday in February alone, as she did now, and she and Ethan drove up the mountain, not to the site of the fire, but to a ridge above it, where you could see the whole valley and where the recovery was visible in a way that felt almost deliberate. The green pushing through the black with the stubborn insistence of things that refused to be finished. They sat in the truck with the engine off and the heat running and the windows starting to fog at the edges. 1 year, she said. He knew what she meant. It had been 8 months since the fire. But the year marker she was counting was different. The year she'd been turning something over. The year she'd been figuring out who she was outside the building with her name on it. How does it feel? He said. Like I can breathe, she said. Which sounds simple, but I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for about a decade. He looked at the valley. What changed? Everything. Nothing. She thought about it. The company is still the company. The board is still the board. Minus Gerald. The work is still relentless. But I'm not, she stopped. I'm not inside it the same way. I step out and I come here and I sit in this truck and none of it can reach me for a few hours and I come back to it afterward and I'm better at it. Which is the opposite of what Gerald said would happen. Gerald was wrong about a lot of things. Gerald was wrong about most things, she said. He was right about one. Ethan looked at her. He said I'd changed, she said. He meant it as an accusation. He was right about the fact. People change, Ethan said. The good ones do. She turned to look at him. Have you changed? He thought about it honestly. I'm less afraid of forward, he said. She held his gaze. That's a big one. Yeah, he said. It is. She reached across the seat and took his hand. Just that. He turned his palm up and held hers back. And they sat on the ridge above the recovering valley and didn't say anything for a while, which was its own kind of language. Then she said, "I need to tell you something." The way she said it changed the air in the truck. He looked at her. "The board voted last week on the program's first operational review," she said. "Unanimously positive. The metrics from the first 3 months of launch are they exceeded every benchmark we set." "That's good news," he said carefully. Because her tone suggested it wasn't only good news. They also voted on something else. She paused. "There's an expansion proposal, taking the program national, 12 additional states. It would require a full-time director, not a consultant. A director. Someone who lives inside the work." He was very still. "They want it to be you," she said. The valley spread below them. Green and black and healing. "Olivia, I know what you're going to say. I don't think you do." "Ridgemont. The shop. Mia's school." "Yes," he said. "All of that. The role is remote-based," she said. "Ethan, I built the structure around you specifically. You'd be based in Ridgemont. The travel is real. I'm not going to pretend it isn't, but you'd be home most of the time. The shop could stay open. We'd bring in a second mechanic to cover when you're traveling." She paused. "I talked to Mia." He stared at her. "You talked to Mia," he said. "Last week, when you were in Douglas County and she was at the Delgados. I called her." Olivia held his gaze without flinching. "I told her what the offer was, and I asked her how she felt about it. Before I brought it to you. You went to my daughter before you came to me." "Yes." "Why?" "Because she's the variable that matters most," Olivia said. "And because if she said no, I was going to tell the board the role needed a different structure." A pause. "And because I respect her enough to ask." The truck was very quiet. "What did she say?" he said. Olivia looked at him. She said, and I'm quoting directly, "My dad's been holding still for 4 years. He needs to move." He exhaled slowly. She also said, Olivia continued, that she wanted approval rights on any travel schedule that conflicted with home games. He looked at the ceiling of the truck for a moment. "Of course she did," he said. "I agreed to the condition." He looked back at her. "You agreed to negotiate travel schedules with a 10-year-old. She's a very effective negotiator." He was quiet. She let the quiet sit, the way she'd learned to, because Ethan Walker's silence wasn't absence. It was processing. And interrupting it was the one thing that guaranteed you'd get a worse answer. "I need to think about it," he said. "Take as long as you need. It might be a few days, Ethan. Take what you need." He nodded. She didn't push. They sat on the ridge for another 20 minutes, watching the valley. And then he drove them back down the mountain, and they had dinner at the kitchen table with Mia, who talked about a school project on regional ecology with the aggressive confidence of a person who had done extensive extra reading and was not going to pretend otherwise, and who did not mention the job offer or the phone call or any of it, because Mia Walker understood timing better than most adults. He thought about it for 3 days. He thought about it the way he thought about the hard mechanical problems, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece examined separately and then fitted back into the whole to see if the shape still held. He thought about Roy, about Doris and her garage pantry, about the 14 other counties they hadn't reached yet, and the ones in 12 other states that were just like them, holding on with insufficient resources and insufficient recognition and the stubborn determination of people who didn't have the option of not holding on. He thought about the version of himself that had driven back into the fire. Not the heroic version, he'd never thought of it as heroic. The version that simply could not look away from a person who needed help. That version had never actually left. He'd just run out of room for it. Between the bills and the grief and the daily math of keeping everything standing. He thought about Claire saying he waited for permission. He thought about Mia saying he needed to move. He thought about standing in the back of the ballroom by the exit, watching Olivia hold 500 people absolutely still with the story of 8 words. On the 3rd evening, he called Olivia. She picked up on the first ring. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for 2 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Yes," he said. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "Ridgemont stays home base. Non-negotiable. Already in the structure." Mia's games take priority over travel scheduling. Already agreed with Mia directly. And I want Roy Gaines as the regional coordinator for the Pacific Northwest counties. I'm not doing this without Roy. A pause. I'll call him tomorrow, she said. He'll say he needs to think about it. I know. He'll say yes within 48 hours. I know that too. A beat. Ethan, she said. Yeah, thank you. Don't thank me, he said. I'm going to be difficult. I'm counting on it. He could hear her, smiling through the phone. And he sat at his kitchen table in Ridgemont, Oregon, in the house where he'd raised his daughter alone for 4 years, where he'd learned to survive quietly and carefully, and without expectation, and he felt the future arrive, not as pressure, not as obligation, as possibility, real possibility, the kind with weight. Roy said yes in 31 hours. The program expansion was announced on the first day of March, and Ethan Walker's name appeared in a press release for the second time in his life. The first had been the fire, which he'd asked Olivia not to publicize, and which she'd respected completely. This one he read over once, at her kitchen table in Portland on a Sunday morning while she made actual coffee with an actual coffee maker. And he didn't say much about it, except that they'd spelled Ridgemont wrong. She had it corrected within an hour. He reread it. Still not thrilled about the word visionary, he said. I told them to use it. I'm a mechanic. You're a mechanic who rebuilt a broken thing into something that works, she said. That's the definition of a visionary. The application is just different. He looked at her across the kitchen. You know what your problem is, he said. She raised an eyebrow. You're better at arguing than you are at being wrong. That's not a problem. That's a feature. He set the press release down. Fair, he said. The anniversary of the fire fell on a Thursday in late July, which meant Mia had soccer practice back after school, and Ethan had a customer vehicle to finish by 5, and Olivia had a board call at 3 that she handled from her laptop in the corner of his office while he worked in the shop, and the familiar task sound of a business being managed drifted under the door and mixed with the smell of engine oil and coffee. It was completely ordinary, and it was the best day he'd had in years. At 6, after Mia got home and Olivia closed the laptop, the three of them drove up the mountain, not to the ridge this time, to the road where it had happened. The guardrail was repaired. The pullout, where the SUV had been, was just a pullout again. The trees along the road were growing back, young and thin and extraordinarily alive, the way things that survive something tend to be not the same as before. But not pretending the fire didn't happen either. Just there, growing anyway. They stood on the shoulder of the road, the three of them, Mia between her father and Olivia, arms crossed, looking at the place where something ended and something else began. Is this weird? Mia said. A little, Olivia said. Good weird or bad weird? Good, Ethan said. Mia looked at the trees. I'm glad you went back, she said to her father. Very simply, not performing it, not building to it, just saying the thing. He put his arm around her. Me too. Bug, he said. Olivia looked at the both of them, and something moved across her face that she didn't try to manage or contain, just let it be there. Visible, in the way she'd been slowly learning to do over the past year, the way she'd learned from watching a man who had never figured out how to be anything other than exactly what he was. Then Mia looked at Olivia. You too. You know. Olivia looked at her. Me too what? I'm glad you were on this road, Mia said, with the matter-of-fact clarity of a person who sees things the way they are and has no patience for complicating them. If you weren't, he would have just driven home, and everything would be different. Olivia looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. Nobody said anything for a moment. The wind came through the recovering trees, and the late July light was long and golden, and the mountains above them were still carrying the marks of what had burned, but underneath those marks, everywhere you looked, if you looked carefully, things were coming back. Things were always coming back. Come on, Ethan said. I promised mac and cheese. From the box? Mia said, wrinkling her nose. From the box, seasoned. That doesn't count, Mia said. For what was likely the 100th time. It counts, he said. For what was likely the 100th time. Olivia laughed. The real one. The one that escaped before she could manage it. The one that, in the past year, had started arriving more and more often, filling up the spaces where the other version of her life used to live, the managed, optimized, airless version that had looked like success from every angle except the one that mattered. They walked back to the truck together. Mia climbed in first, then Olivia, then Ethan. He sat behind the wheel for a moment before starting the engine. Looked at the road ahead, at the mountains, at the sky still blue and clear at 6 in the evening. He thought about a Thursday afternoon 1 year ago. Driving down this road, thinking about hamburger for dinner, and soccer cleats, and nothing in particular. He thought about what it cost to turn around. He thought about what it gave back. He started the truck, drove them home. And Ethan Walker, the mechanic from Ridgemont, the man who ran toward fires when everyone else ran away. The father who made terrible instant coffee and seasoned box mac and cheese and kept showing his daughter that the right thing was worth doing, even when nobody was watching, understood clearly and completely that the life he'd stopped believing in had not disappeared. It had just been waiting for him to stop surviving and start choosing. And he had chosen. Every single day since that Thursday, he had chosen. That was enough. That would always be enough.